So good afternoon to everyone and want to welcome you all to day 3 of the Virtual Training Institute 8.0. As you come into the presentation, if you would take a moment to go to the chat box and just introduce yourself, put in your name and where you're from. I just want to remind you that you'll want to change the to function to everyone. Otherwise, it will only come to Trisha and myself. So go ahead and introduce yourselves, and we will get started in just a moment. As people are coming in, I want to go over just a couple of housekeeping issues. So just a reminder that this is in webinar mode, so you will not be able to unmute yourself, but please feel free to use the chat box. Trisha has an interactive presentation, so I know you'll be using it quite a bit. The other thing I want to remind you is that your proof of participation will come automatically approximately 24 hours after the end of this presentation, and it will come automatically from Zoom. The other thing I want to mention is that at the end of this presentation, when I close it down, you should see an evaluation form. So please fill those out so that we can get some feedback. And before we get started, I am going to launch a quick poll so that Trisha knows who we have in. So if you would take a moment just to put your role in adult education, that would be great. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and end the poll, and overwhelmingly, a lot of instructors, as we might expect, and a few instructional specialists, IASs, and transition specialists. So this afternoon, we have Trisha Berry from who is going to do a presentation on destination motivation. So I'm going to turn it over to Trisha.
Thank you, Ramona. Good afternoon, everyone. It is so great to see you. I can see a long list of participants, even though I can't see your face. I'm so happy you're here this afternoon. My name is Trisha Berry. I am the Director of Clinical and Practicum Programs for Purdue University Global. And I have worked in higher ed. This month actually is my 25-year anniversary. And I started out in higher ed kind of accidentally. I'm actually a registered occupational therapist and took a part-time teaching gig when my son was born so that I had a little extra income coming in. And then over time that morphed into a full-time teaching gig and a department chair gig. And then pretty soon some administrative gigs on top of that. I love working in higher education and I love working in adult education, but it is not without its challenges. And one of the challenges, and one of the reasons I know you're all here, is that sometimes it's just really hard to get our students to do what we want them to do. So what I'm going to be sharing today is some ideas. Nothing in anything we do in education is 100% for sure, and we only have a short amount of time. So I can't get super in-depth on theory, and you're not going to come out of here with PhDs about motivation. But I do hope that by the end of our time together, you have at least 1 or 2 new tools for your toolbox, some tricks you can maybe keep up your sleeve and pull out when you need to. Okay. The disclaimer, the opinions that I'm expressing are those of my opinions. They're those I have created. They don't represent the state of Maryland, and I'll just further tell you, they don't necessarily represent Purdue Global either. They just happen to be my employer. Okay, I will warn you, and Ramona's already mentioned this, I tend to be a fairly interactive presenter. And even in online, there are ways we can interact. So I am going to be asking you to respond a lot in the chat box. I know we can't all talk to each other because that gets crazy in this environment. But I am going to be asking you to respond in the chat box. And the first thing I'm going to ask you to respond to is to take a look at these pictures and tell me if you had to pick one of them for a destination for you to go to right now, which one would you pick? You only get one. Some of you might say you want to go to any of them, but which ones? Yeah. Lots of C's. I think C would probably be my favorite. I would take any of these, to be truthful, but C would probably be my favorite as well. Lots of A's, B's, couple of D's thrown in there. But it looks like A and C really win. And a lot less for D and some for B in there. So here's the next question. In the chat box, type Y. What is it about that destination that interests you? And there is no right or wrong answer. We all have a different take on this. Yeah, some it looks relaxing, some like the water, being serene, uncluttered. Yes. Some love big cities, some love peace and quiet. Oh, someone wants to learn more about European history and loves museums. Oh, so someone wants to learn while they're on vacation. Lots of folks that are saying water is calming. The high desert, love the country with the colors and the noise. Oh, Yvette, a pina colada at the beach. I love that concept. Sounds wonderful. And I also love the peaceful look of the mountains as well. So you'll notice just even in our group here, right? We all are motivated to go to different destinations. And we're all motivated for different reasons. Some of us like serenity. Some of us don't want serenity. Some of us want to learn while we're traveling. So we all have different motivations for the destinations that we choose. And that's the same for our adults, right? When they come to school, they have different motivations for coming to school and the reasons they come to school. And really that motivation is whatever their destination is, right? Might not be something as cool as Paris or a beach in Tahiti, but they do have a destination they want to get to when they come to us as adult students. Okay, so your next job in the chat box, I warned you, right? That you're going to have to keep interacting. Your next job in the chat box, tell me what you think adults want from education. Why did they come to us? Better job, better opportunities, practical uses, assimilate. Oh, Ishra, I'd like to hear more about that. What do you mean by assimilate? Improving their lives, stepping stone, jobs in school, make their families proud. That's such a big thing for our adult students. Help with their goals, self-improvement, help their children, opportunities for them and their children. They want to be liked. Oh, and feel American. That's an interesting piece of feedback, Ishra. I've not heard that before, but because I work in an online environment, we may not see as much of that, but I could definitely see where that would be something that would be important. And yeah, they want to learn English and be in ESL. Okay, well, I think you guys pretty much covered the things that I had on my slide. A lot of our adult students, their motivation for coming to us is that they want a better life, career advancement. You all covered that in your feedback as well. More money is also something that happens. Folks feel like if they are advancing in their career, they're also going to advance with their income. Setting an example for their children is huge. I was just at a graduation ceremony last week, and one of the graduates got up and spoke, and her opening line was, I always thought I was a failure and I knew I could never, ever accomplish anything. But now I've shown that I can, and my kids know that they can do it too. those kinds of things that our students want to do for their families are huge motivators. Better working hours sometimes for folks, if they can advance in their career, then they maybe don't have to work nights and weekends anymore, or they get better shifts within their work. And also, sometimes our adults just like to learn for fun. They like to learn new things, develop new hobbies or new skills or things that they can do outside of their work. I love some of the other feedback that you all added, and I did not think of those. I will next time I present this. I'm going to add some of that to the slide. So thanks for crowdsourcing that for me. Independence is also a huge thing for our adults, and particularly in my experience, I've worked a lot with women who were trapped in relationships because they didn't have a way to become more independent, and so that becomes a motivation for them as well. Okay, so we know what motivates our students. I think we all have a pretty good concept of what that is. If you look at the literature, historically in the literature, we see motivation defined as one of two different types of motivation. So the first motivation is intrinsic motivation. That kind of motivation comes from within the person, and they do something just because they want to do it. They aren't going to get anything out of it. They're not going to get any kind of award or trinket. They just do it because they want to do it. The other type of motivation is extrinsic motivation, and it's the exact opposite. I'm sure most of you have heard this before, that motivation is provided by something outside of the person. So there's some kind of tangible reward involved, a trophy or some kind of prize, a food, maybe for some it's the grade, but they're getting something out of whatever it is that they're doing. And all of us have different kinds of motivations. Some of us are more intrinsically motivated and we do things just because that's what we want. Some of us are more extrinsically motivated and we do things because we're looking to get something out of it. And I have no better example of that than my children. And so full disclosure, my children know I talk about them when I present. They do not give me permission to talk about them when I present, but I do it anyway. They're young adults now, and so I can make fun of things they did when they were little kids. And there is such a stark difference in my house. I have two children. I have one girl and one boy. And my boy was always extrinsically motivated. He would do anything if it was the right extrinsic motivator. Always. So as an example, when my children were in elementary school, up through fourth grade, they didn't get grades. The teachers assigned them a 1, 2, or 3 on their report cards based on how the teachers felt that they were performing. And my son would get a lot of 1s and 2s, maybe sometimes some 3s. But when we would talk to him about that, he would say, I don't know why she gave me that. I think she just doesn't like me. Or I don't know why it would be that, because I thought I did this well. And, you know, in his second and third grade frame of reference, right, he probably didn't articulate it quite that well. But those were the conversations we would have with him after report cards. Like, you know, maybe you could try harder and look toward getting a 3. So that lasted all through fourth grade. And we battled him and battled him and battled him. He hated spelling. And I would literally have to hold him down in the chair to have him practice his spelling words. And he never saw the point. He's like, she's just going to give me a 1 anyway, so why does it matter if I try? We get to fifth grade, and in fifth grade, they started actually giving grades. And he could see when he did something and when he did well, he got a higher grade. And all of a sudden, we did not have to speak to him about school again. We literally never said a word to him about grades ever again, even through college, except for sometimes you don't need to worry about it quite that much. It's okay if you don't get an A on something. B's are all right. Doesn't matter. Very extrinsically motivated, but he could see how his effort got him the grades that he wanted. So he wasn't doing it because he wanted to do it. He was just doing it because he knew he was going to get a good grade, and he liked getting good grades. The other child who grew up in my house, my daughter, um, was the exact opposite. She loved getting the twos and threes. She mostly got twos and threes when she was younger on her report card. And then when it got to the grades, it didn't seem to matter to her. So in particular, in fifth grade, she scored, when she would take standardized tests, she scored off the charts with reading. And she's just it was a natural gift for her. But in about sixth grade, she came home with an F on her report card in reading. And I'm like, what's the deal? How did this happen? And she was like, I don't know. I did everything I was supposed to do. And so I call the teacher and say, I'm a little concerned about this. This is an area she's pretty strong in, wondering why this happened. The teacher said, well, she didn't turn any work in. So I go back to my daughter and I say, well, it sounds like you haven't turned your work in. And she says, well, I did it all. Why does it matter if he sees it or not? That's an example of intrinsic motivation, right? She knew she had done it. She did it. She got it accomplished. She didn't see any reason for the teacher to have to validate that. So we had to have some chats with her about why it was important. But such a stark difference in why our students do things. And it's really important for us to understand what motivates them, where they're coming from, and why they want to get where they're going and how they can get themselves where they're going. Because if they come to us, we know they're motivated somehow. We just need to figure out what it is so we know what buttons to push to try to help them with that. Okay, so let's go back and look at this list. Now, this was my list, remember, that I started with, and you guys have added a little bit to it. But here are the things that our adults want from education. So tell me, do you think these are mostly intrinsic or extrinsic? Are there things they're doing just because they want them, or are they things they're doing because they get a reward out of it? Okay, a little bit of both, a little bit of mix. Yeah. Okay, lots of folks voting for both or for mixed. Couple here for intrinsic. Some for extrinsic. A good mix of answers here. I think it definitely kind of leans toward the both. Yeah, Stanley says hobbies are definitely intrinsic. Sue says they want the rewards. I tend to lean toward the mixed sort of thought on this. Although I will say, for the most part, I think they're intrinsic in terms of these are things people want for themselves. They're wanting to accomplish something so they can set the better example for their children or so they can advance in their career. But definitely things like more money, that's a pretty extrinsic reward, or career advancement could be an extrinsic reward. So I do think that there's a lot of mixed motivations here. I think one thing for us as adult educators, if we can find out from them why they're in our classrooms and what they're looking to get out of it, it helps us understand where they're going in terms of their motivation, if it's a more extrinsic motive or if it's a more intrinsic motive. And again, if we know what those motives are, it helps us kind of push the right buttons, hopefully, as we're working with the students. Okay, so how do we determine motivation? Because this is pretty tricky. There should be, and Ramona, I forgot to ask, did the handout get loaded?
I think I can get that in the chat.
Okay. Yeah, let's pop that in. And actually, I'm going to back up here. Okay. If you would all just grab that handout real quickly. And I'm going to have you answer the questions on the handout. And I'm just going to give you a minute or two to do that. So I'll put myself on mute while you do that. And I'll give it just 1 or 2 minutes. I'm going to have you answer those questions, and then we're going to come back and talk about them. Go ahead and take care of that, and I'll be back in just a second. All right. Hopefully everybody's had a chance to kind of work through that. If you haven't, you can kind of work through it as we go. But this is called, what we're going to look at is called the Self-Determination Index. And this is something you could use in your classrooms. This is a published index and something you might be able to use as a tool with your students if you wanted to do so. And today you're going to be your own student. So we're going to look at the scale, and you're going to score yourselves here. The intrinsic motivation are items 1, 5, 9, and 13. Extrinsic are 3, 7, 11, and 15. A motivation, which means whatever, I could go either direction, are 8, 4, 8, 12, and 16. And then identified regulations are items 2, 6, 10, and 14. So as you look at how you answered these questions, go ahead and give yourself a score for intrinsic motivation. So it would be a 0 through 4 on that. Also for extrinsic, and then the same for the other two categories. And I'll give you just a second to do that. All right, and then our next step here is you're going to determine how you're going to look at how self-determined you are. So you're going to take 2 times your intrinsic motivation, and you're going to add your identified regulation to that. Then you're going to subtract the number of you got for extrinsic motivation. And then you're going to take 2 times your A motivation and subtract that. Complicated. You didn't know you were going to do math this afternoon, I'm sure. Okay, and we don't need, Alexander, thank you for sharing your number. We don't necessarily need you to share your number. I don't want to out people. Okay, Stanley, I'm sorry you're lost. So you should have a score for intrinsic motivation. Take that times 2. And then add the identified regulation score to that. Okay, and then once you have that number, you'll subtract the extrinsic motivation score from that. Okay, set that number aside for a moment and take 2 times the A motivation scale. Okay, and then take your first number that you got and subtract the second number from it. And that will give you your self-determination. Okay, Catherine, I'm sorry you're behind. I was afraid that might happen, that we might not be able to get through this. And I don't want to take too much more time with it because I do want to move on to the content. What we can do, the handout will be in your Padlet, and then I believe the presentation is going to be in the Padlet too. So you can go back and figure this out for yourself. And my email is going to be here at the end. So if you want to go back and figure this out, you can email me and I'll talk you through it. This is actually, although it doesn't feel this way right now to some of you, it's actually a very, very simple way to determine how self-determined our students are. And it's something, if you were trying to figure out how self-motivated our students are, you could use this index as when you start a class or even when you start an activity in a class to say, hey, what are your real motivations with this? Are you excited about this? Are you not excited about this? And you could get kind of an idea of where your students are with this. I know it feels a little complicated right now. I promise it's a super simple tool. And just because we don't have a ton of time, we can't go through it again, but if you want to connect with me in email, we'll talk through it. So once you get to the point where you understand what someone's motivation is or what their level of motivation is, it's also important to kind of think about what the other factors in that might be. And first of all, adults, all of us as human beings really, are motivated by some pretty simple physiological needs, right? Our needs for hunger and thirst, so our needs for sustenance, our needs for sleep and rest, our needs for physical comfort, and our needs for avoiding pain. And I would actually throw in their emotional comfort on this too. So although that isn't physiology, I think it has a physiological implication. So one of the things that I find frequently with my adults is they're having trouble learning, but part of the reason they're having trouble learning is because some of these other needs aren't getting met. For instance, I had a student I was just working with this morning who did not do well at clinicals and was not successful in his clinical experience, which is always really sad to see because our students are right at the end of the program when they do their clinicals. And so, he's this far from graduation and isn't doing well. And as we probed into it, it took a lot of questions and it took multiple questions from multiple people. But what we found out is that he was homeless. So he was living in his car during clinicals and he had no food. So physiologically, we know that he was not in a space to be able to be learning and doing what he needed to do at his clinicals. So sometimes I find when our students are not learning the way we know they're capable of or the way we think they should be progressing, we have to kind of go back to the basics and check for these things. And you can go back and do that with your students if you need to. So if you start asking probing questions, it is hard sometimes to get information because often students are embarrassed and they don't want to share. But if we can get to the root cause of that, where we can find out what's happening and then we know how to help them, then hopefully we can get them back on the path to learning. And just so you all know, our young man in the clinicals, we were able to get him some emergency funding. And so he's definitely on a better path now. And I think once we get him stabilized a little bit, then he'll be able to go to his clinicals and be successful. Those are the kinds of things that we always have to step back and look, because sometimes we don't know what's going on with our adults. And if we don't ask those questions, we won't find out. The other thing we have to think about with our students is what is their cognitive mindset? And in general, there are kind of two mindsets that we see. Now, there are a bunch more, right? This is a huge oversimplification, but we only have 45 minutes, so we have to oversimplify a bit. So first of all, there's that fixed mindset, and your students with fixed mindsets will probably say things like, I'm just not very smart. I can't learn. No matter what I do, it doesn't work out. I don't try because there's no point. I'll just screw things up anyway. Anybody know students like this? Anybody have students like this in their classrooms? No. Marissa says she doesn't have students like that. That's fabulous, Marissa. Yeah, others are saying they have a few. Sometimes it's based on age. Sometimes it's based on personal experience. Marissa, I'd be interested to know what kind of environment you work in if you're comfortable sharing that. Folks with a fixed mindset also typically hate it when people point out their mistakes and when they're given feedback. So with a fixed mindset, people have decided how things are and they think this is how they are and it's not going to change. So they feel like they can't change it at all. So they're just staying in that fixed path. This is how it is. And actually, Jeannie just brought up a perfect example, math. I think our mindsets can change sometimes based on what the subject is, right? And a lot of students have decided they are not good at math and they can't do math. So they go into those math classes with a fixed mindset that they can't do it. And obviously then they're setting themselves up for that. When a student makes that decision in their head, when any of us do, because we all do it, when we make a decision in our head, we create challenges for ourselves. And that's in contrast to the growth mindset. And what you'll hear from folks who are approaching things with a growth mindset is stuff like, I can figure this out. I can do something new because this isn't working. Feedback helps me learn. A mistake is a learning opportunity. I know I can do this if I keep trying. So there's a huge difference, huge contrast between that, right? Our fixed mindset folks are like, nope, this is how it is. It's not going to change. This is how it's going to happen. And so they are in a state kind of learned helplessness where they just feel like they can't do it. They can't go forward and there's no point. Whereas our growth mindset folks have a better sense of self-efficacy. They know that they can make something happen if they work at it, and that it's just going to take them time to do that. Typically, our folks with a growth mindset are less reluctant to fail, where folks with a fixed mindset anticipate they're going to fail. And so when they fail, then it just kind of reinforces what they've already made up their mind to do. So it even solidifies that fixed mindset a little bit more. And I do think it's important to understand that we all probably flip in and out of these mindsets all the time. I was a very good student in high school and in college, but chemistry was my nemesis. And so anytime I went into anything chemistry, I was like, yeah, this is not my thing. I can't do it. I'm not going to do well. Only C I got in college was in chemistry. Whereas my other classes, I would go in and I'd be super excited and ready to go. And there is a mental approach that we take and a mental shift we take. So this is something, if we could get to the bottom of this with our students, if you pay attention to what they're saying or you pay attention to their attitudes about stuff, if we know they have a fixed mindset, then again, we're going to have to push very different buttons to get them motivated than we do if they have a growth mindset. Okay, so let's talk about some theories. And I know theories are like, yawn, what do we have to do? But I think they're important to form the foundation of what we do with our students. And this one, if you're all educators, this is not going to be a strange theory to you. Probably everybody's familiar with it. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And this does kind of touch on what I talked about just a little bit ago with physiological motivations, that our students need to have some of those basic needs met before they can actually learn. And so the bottom of Maslow's pyramid are innate physical needs: food, water, shelter, sleep. Our safety needs: physical and emotional safety, health, housing. And I think with our adult students too, finances are a huge issue, because it's going to be difficult for them to learn if they're sitting in class thinking about how they're going to pay their bill, or if they have money for groceries to feed themselves or their family. And then the social belonging, the self-esteem, and the self-actualization come on top of that. So with our adults, again, just making sure there's a foundation there, or if we see things are going a little awry with them, or maybe they're losing their motivation, taking a step back and checking into these bottom of the pyramid kind of needs to make sure the student is set, if they will share that with us, because they won't always share. And there's a gentleman called Alderfer who kind of expanded on Maslow, and he said, you know what, this is all good, it makes sense, but I think we can make this theory better. And he categorized those needs for Maslow into 3 different categories. The base category is existence. These are things people need just to exist in the world. And I know for some of you, if you've worked with adult students, you've probably come across those students who are just trying to exist. Literally, they're just trying to get from day to day. And if those are the needs they're trying to fulfill, it's going to be much more difficult for them to learn and to be motivated to learn, because they don't even have those basic needs met. So again, one of the ways we motivate them or help with their motivation is to do what we can to help make sure those needs are met, get them referrals to the right resources or the right help, because we often can't help with those things directly. But if we can figure out what that problem is, then hopefully we can get them to where they need to go to help with that. And then after existence comes relatedness. And some people might dispute this, but most of us need human relationships. We need to feel like we're needed and that we belong socially somewhere. What that looks like might be different for everyone, but that relatedness also helps us to build our self-esteem. And so that's that next category that Alderfer talked about. And then that last, the highest, the pinnacle of the triangle, which is hopefully where we want to see our students be, is with self-actualization, that they're achieving the potential and their ability and purpose when they get to that point on the triangle, but they need a lot of these other needs to be met before they can get there. All right, our next theory, human motivation theory. You'll see this one called a lot of different things. You'll see it called 3 needs, acquired needs, motivational needs. And McClellan's thought was that people all have 3 motivators. All humans have 3 motivators: achievement, affiliation, and power. So achievement's pretty clear. You can probably pick up on what that is, even just by listening to the word. The high achievers are the folks that like to set and accomplish goals. They like feedback on their progress. They do tend to like to work alone because they want to achieve and they feel like other people drag them down and slow them down. But they are really probably fairly self-directive, intrinsically motivated individuals who can kind of look what they want and get it. Your high affiliation individuals want to be liked. They want to fit into the group. And if you ever want to try to figure out who the high affiliation individuals are, just walk around some high school girls for a while and watch their behavior. And you will see very quickly the ones who really need to be liked, the ones that need to fit in with the others in order to feel like they have some sense of self-worth, and the things that they'll do in order to fit in with those. Now, it's not just teenage girls that have that need, but they are often a perfect example. It's an easy place to see sometimes where that high affiliation comes from. And we all know people like this that want to be liked and they want to fit in with the group. They like collaboration and they're not risk takers because they want to stay as a part of that group. And then high power individuals, these folks like control and influence. They like to be in charge. They like to win. They like the status that they get from those kinds of things. Interestingly, because they're high power folks, a lot of times they'll maintain a social distance from people too, because that allows them to kind of move toward their power. And if you get too entrenched with somebody else, then that might take away some of your power. Now, why does this relate to our students and why does it relate to our adults? Again, if you go back and think about it, I'm sure all of you can think of different individuals, different students that fit into this. And if you can keep these kinds of things in mind and notice them in your students, like if you notice the student who always wants to be in the center of the social group during break times, or always is inviting other students out to class, out to do whatever they do after class, right? We'll say they're going to lunch after class. If we're inviting them out to dinner, if you're seeing students that really need that social inclusion, then you know there's somebody who's a high affiliation individual. And so maybe you craft learning experiences for them that allow them to capitalize on that. Or if you're placing them in some kind of internship, you place them in a facility that you know will have high affiliation. Whereas if you have somebody who's high power, we want to teach them to use the power in a positive manner, right? Not to manipulate others with their power, but maybe you put them in a situation where they can use that power. You put them in a competition where they can work toward winning, and then that helps them achieve their goals. So this theory is one that we can use and apply it when we see those. And all of us have a combination of these in our personalities. And again, I think from situation to situation, sometimes things might change. In some places, I might be a high affiliation person. Like I want to be a part of the group and I want to have friends. And in other places, I might be like, leave me the heck alone. I got stuff to do. I got things to check off my list and I'm going to get those done. So we have to not only identify those and see what's predominant, but then also watch how those might change in our students from situation to situation. Next theory is Vroom's expectancy theory. And this one is sort of, when you read it, you kind of go, well, duh, of course, this is how it is. But Vroom's theory is a little more complex than what I could put on the slide in this short presentation. Basically, an expectancy theory, it means that a student will put in an effort to perform better if they think the reward is worth it. Now, there's a couple conditions that have to be met for that. And the first is the reward has to be worth it. It has to be clear to the student. So, and you're really talking about, I mean, the reward could be intrinsic or extrinsic, but it has to be very, very clear. What's that reward going to be? Where are you going to get to when you reach that goal? And if the reward is clear and it's something they want, students will be willing to put in the effort to increase their performance to get to that reward. The other piece of this theory is that the criteria for performance has to be very clear as well. Because if you have a reward dangling out there and you say to them, okay, just increase your effort and you'll get the reward. Well, how much do you have to increase your effort? What does that have to be? If I'm only a C student and I get to a B, does that mean I get the reward? Or if I'm a B student, I get to an A, does that mean I get to the reward? So there has to be clear criteria along the continuum here, but definitely this is a way to think about motivating the students. If you have somebody that you're trying to figure out, okay, we know they want to go here, here's their reward, here are the things you need to perform to get to that reward, then they should put in the effort to get to that. All right, our goal setting theory, Locke's goal setting. Goals should be clear, they should be challenging, but attainable, and they should be measurable. Does this sound like anything familiar to anybody? There's something you can think of that this ties into, maybe? Yeah, you got it right away. Right away. And Locke didn't actually come up with the term SMART goals, but this came out of his goal setting theory, that we create SMART goals that are specific, measurable, acceptable, realistic, and time-based. And if you think about that, these kind of go back into that expectancy theory, right? If we can set up these goals, we know what's going to happen. The reward is whatever happens at the end of the goal. We're creating a measurable performance so that folks are going to probably put in the effort that they need. So goals can be super helpful. Great way to use these in the classroom is goals for the individual course. When students start a course, what's your goal to get out of this course? And if you have them define that, then you can help them meet that goal, or you can review them periodically to get them moving toward those goals. Okay, couple last things to remember. Their basic needs must be met for our adults to have optimal learning. So the food, clothing, shelter, financial needs, physical safety, emotional safety. That's just super important. And sometimes it's hard to determine. Now, I also want to be clear that I'm not saying that people can't learn if these needs aren't met, but for optimal learning to occur, these things need to be in place. Adults have a purpose for their learning. That purpose is their motivation. They know why they came to you. They know what they wanted out of it. And so if you can find that purpose, hopefully you can help kind of push the right buttons, use the right levers to get them motivated to move toward that purpose. And then also, and we don't have time to talk about this too much, but adults have existing knowledge and experiences that influence their journey. And I think sometimes that's something that we forget. When we have an adult that's behaving a certain way in the classroom, sometimes if we step back and ask questions, because the behavior will seem kind of odd or like it's not moving them toward their goals, but when you go back and start asking questions and you get some of their context and you understand where they're coming from, it helps you understand why they're doing their things they're doing. And again, that plays into their motivation. Our prior experiences as students and with success in the classroom may give us a fixed mindset, or may give us that growth mindset. And so the more we can ask those questions and understand where the students are coming from, the more we can understand how to put things in front of them that help them get where they want to go. Ultimately, what we're always trying to do is to get the students to whatever their destination is. We want to get them to their mountaintops with their beautiful views, or we want to get them to their relaxing beach with the pina colada, or we want to get them to Paris where they can look at the museums and enjoy the bustle of the city. Or maybe they just want to be out kayaking on a river where it's nice and calm and they can enjoy the peace and quiet around them. Ultimately, what we want to try to do is understand where they want to go and why they want to go, and then use these theories and techniques to help keep them pointed toward their destination. And there's a quick reference slide. And here is my information. I'll leave that up so you all can jot things down if you'd like. I'd love to hear from folks, love to connect with folks. And I'll open it up here. Ramona, you can keep me on track for how much time we have. I'll open it up for some questions if folks have any questions or anything you want to ask about.
I have 15 minutes.
Perfect. Right, I'm not seeing any questions. The group suddenly got quiet.
Okay, yeah, it's looking like there are no questions, but they have your contact information. Oh, we do have a question.
Shayna said, do you have any thoughts about maintaining momentum with motivation? Yeah, that's hard. One of the things I think that's so tricky about motivation is it's so different for individual people. And so our challenges in the classroom are, as you all know, are to provide things that appeal to the broad group. I think from my perspective, the best way to be able to maintain that motivation is to really understand and know your students and know what they're looking for. So when I teach classes, and even when I do sessions like this, I really try to start at the beginning, just finding out what people want out of the class or out of whatever the session is. Because if you understand what their motivation is, then hopefully you can help them maintain the momentum. I think it's a tricky thing, and it's also about paying attention and knowing your students as individuals. So if you can use some of these tools that I showed you today, sometimes that'll help you decide how to maintain the momentum with them. And honestly, sometimes I think the best thing is just a conversation, and it does depend a bit on your relationship with the student. But if I have a student who had been doing really well and then all of a sudden the bottom's falling out, just a conversation. Hey, I'm worried about you. You were doing really well and now you're not. What's up? How can I help you? And I think always with our adults, we want to approach that from I've noticed this is a challenge and I want to help you. I'm on your side and I'm here to assist you. I think if we go at it from a disciplinarian power kind of structure, then we don't get a very good response. But if we can throw it out there that we want to help, that's usually how we see a little bit more from them. Jeannie, great question. Techniques to help with fixed mindset. I think it depends on how fixed the mindset is. Like if it's a student, we'll just use the math example. If it's a student who is just determined that they can't do well with math, setting up some situations where they can be successful. Typically, if folks have a fixed mindset about something, it's because they've had bad experiences and they're gun shy and they've got that kind of learned helplessness that I mentioned on the slide. So if you can set up solutions for them that help them have some small successes, and you can build those small successes upon one another. An example I can give you, I teach in health sciences, and well, I don't teach much anymore, but when I used to teach, and when I ran a program on a ground campus, our students, when we got in the pharmacology class, when we got to dosage calculations, and they had to calculate dosages of medications, which involves both decimals and fractions, they were terrified. And I always knew when it was dosage calculation day, because even though I didn't teach that course, I would hear them saying, okay, we got to do this. I don't know how we're going to do it. And I'm so bad at math, and I'm just going to fail this section of the course. And even if I fail that on the certification exam, I'll get everything else right and it'll be fine. So I started strategizing with my faculty about how we could go in and teach some things to make it not so scary for them. And we developed just some really, really basic this is how you deal with decimals. This is how you deal with fractions. And we had these little guide sheets that we would walk them through. And we actually, on that campus, we had the advantage when the instructor was teaching it, I was free at that time. And so I could go into the classroom too, and both of us would work with students, and we'd spend lots of times making sure they got comfortable with that. And once they could build some success with those really simple exercises, then all of a sudden the dosage calculations became less frightening. Now, did it take a lot of time and energy on our part? Absolutely, but it was totally worth it, because that little bit of time and energy saved them a lot of frustration later and allowed them to go on and be successful with that. Yeah, Brooke, how do we suggest and motivate students with a growth mindset? And this kind of just feeds into what we were talking about, what I was just talking about. I think if you can give the students quick wins and little wins, it doesn't have to be big, amazing things, but if you can give them little wins, you can show them, oh, look, you can do that. You did just fine. Now that you did fine with that one, let's try this one. So really kind of building little tiny steps. For me, the biggest thing is always when you have a student who's just determined they can't do something, typically the task is overwhelming to them and they don't even know where to start. So if you can break it down, start small, give them some little thing that they can be successful with. And then once they're successful with that, give them another little thing they can be successful with and let them build on those. All right. Julie says, I'm interested to hear from others about ways they've supported and motivated learners when their basic needs are not being met beyond referring them to campus resources. It's rough out there for so many, and persistence is key. Yeah, I agree with that, Julie. I'd love to hear if other folks have suggestions too, because I think this is one where you can never have enough suggestions. Just some things, again, from my experience. Number one, in those situations, I think the students need to know that we care about them and that somebody's there for them. Does that mean that they're learning? Maybe not, but sometimes that might be more important, right? They're getting those basic needs met for love and belonging, and referring them to other places and for resources. And then follow up, making sure that if you're getting them connected with resources, that those resources are working out for them. And I think that in doing that, if you're checking in with them and how's that going, and did you get connected and was it helpful, then they feel that caring toward them. I think too, and this is such a hard thing in education, but I think too, being willing to be flexible sometimes with policies and procedures. And it's a double-edged sword here, because we know that there are learners out there that will take advantage of late policies or due dates or things like that. But also, if you know somebody's in a really rough spot and they're doing the best they can, it would maybe make sense to make some adjustments and help them through whatever that rough spot is. My student who was having trouble with clinicals, he's going to fail the course because of the trouble he's having with clinicals. And we got together and talked about it and thought, you know what, he's again this far from graduation. We can't rightly put him in a position where he can't graduate, but he also can't afford to take the class again. And so our dean approved just waiving the tuition for him to retake the class. So we're going to help him get his home life stabilized a little bit more, make sure he does have a place to live before he goes to clinicals, and then he has some food. We'll put him back at clinicals. We'll give him another chance. We won't charge him tuition for the course, and hopefully he finishes that course. If he's not successful, we know that we've done everything we can to try to help him be successful. We know he's motivated. He keeps coming to us and saying, I'll do this. How can I do this? How can I help? So I think thinking creatively and thinking out of the box. Yeah, that's a great idea, Shayna. Is the having little snacks in the room. It all depends on your population, and our populations are also varied anymore. Like I work in a 100% online institution, so we really don't know what's going on with students unless they share. For some of you that are in classrooms, you might be able to see and pick up on some things. So I think we have to, as educators, not be so focused on our policies and procedures that we lose sight of the people that we're trying to serve. And I know it's a difficult balance. It's not easy to do that. Oh, good. Thanks, Ruth. Thanks for that, for sharing that. The book on mindset. Okay, I started the presentation by making fun of my children. So I'll tell you, they are now 22 and 25. They're both out of college and they both do very well, but they both still have completely different sets of motivation. That has not changed. It has been consistent in their personalities throughout time. But part of parenting them was learning what pushed their buttons or tripped their levers to get them to do what we wanted them to do. And also, I think part of that journey for them was them figuring out what was important to them so they knew how to put themselves in situations that they can motivate themselves. And that's something we've been very intentional about as parents. I think it's something we can be very intentional about as educators, helping our students learn what's important to them and what motivates them. If they have that self-insight, then hopefully they can help structure their own environment to help facilitate their own success. And I know we need to wrap up, so I'll leave it with that. Ramona, did you have any housekeeping?
So on behalf of the Maryland Department of Labor, I want to thank you so much for this wonderfully just valuable information. Thank you for sharing with us, your expertise and your knowledge. Again, want to remind you that there'll be an evaluation that pops up. We do have a few more sessions later on today, and then also just a couple tomorrow. So if you're still interested, please go ahead and sign up. And otherwise, wish everybody a good rest of their day. And again, thank you, Tricia, for this wonderful presentation.
Yeah, thank you everyone for being here. I know there are lots of ways you could spend your time this afternoon, so appreciate you sharing a bit of your time with me. And I know a couple of you had questions about the Sims. Please feel free to reach out. The information was in my reference list as well, but I'd be happy to share it with you. So thanks very much and enjoy the rest of your conference.